Alright, today we'll be talking about A Man by Keiichiro Hirano, translated by Eli K. William. And this is an interesting one for me because I had actually read A Man before, and the first time through I really enjoyed it, and I was really looking forward to reading more of Hirano's work. So I promptly went to At the End of the Matinee and really did not like it at all. And then eventually Eclipse came out and I read it, and I'm kind of two minds. I enjoyed it, but I wasn't kind of floored by it, but I kind of feel like I should have disliked it more, and yet I still enjoyed it, so kind of middle ground. But definitely after The Ruined Map, I wanted to revisit A Man because both books deal with a loss of identity, where specifically The Ruined Map deals with this main character losing his identity by not having any boundaries, ostensibly. A Man deals more with somebody who would want to abandon his identity in search of another one. But suffice to say that the books are very sort of thematically connected. And it was really surprising then to reread A Man, or rather, I suppose I should go into the quick short summary, which is A Man is about, it follows primarily a lawyer who is investigating an individual who dies in a forestry accident because after dying, it turns out his wife discovers that the man who she thought was Daisuke was in fact not Daisuke at all, which she finds out when she tries to contact Daisuke's family. So what follows is Kido, the lawyer's investigation into the true identity of this person, Daisuke, and again, the sort of motives behind his abandoning his past. So would I recommend this book? So this is the thing. Had you asked me the first time I just finished it, I would have wholeheartedly recommended it. If you ask me now, I'm really of a mixed mind. And the biggest reason, and when it comes to pros and cons, I'll go into this in a bit more detail. This is an incredibly blunt book. In many ways, it reads almost more like an outline, an extremely detailed outline to a novel than a novel itself. Oftentimes, there's a lot of debate about show versus tell and what that means, but oftentimes what'll happen is a chapter will begin either after the action or leading up to the action with either a summary of where the character is at, either their feelings after the action or their feelings going into the action. Then you'll have a few scenes of the action itself, and then you'll have a lot of the character reflecting on what happened. So in terms of the actual action part of the book, by which I mean a part that isn't an internal monologue, a part that isn't a summary, a part that isn't just spelling things out, there's very little in this already sub 300 page book. And that the consequence of that is that it's very blunt, to the point of it will describe an event, oftentimes then summarize the event, and then oftentimes later on just outright spell out exactly what you're supposed to feel or what you should take away from it. And in that sense, if that is the type of thing, I guess another way to put it, like in terms of a sort of charitable way of putting it, is that it reads like a book for people who don't have a lot of time to read and can't read a lot in one sitting, and maybe don't have the time to really reflect deeply on a book. So the constant reviewing, the constant spelling things out, and so forth would be good for, I'm thinking of like a Japanese audience that maybe reads on the train or something, and it's not a good environment for reading. There's lots of people, you're being jostled around. So in that case, the constant refreshings, the constant, or reiteratings rather, and the spelling, the very bluntness of the story may actually work to the book's favor. In that context, sure. But I think for most people, I mean, if you're just going to read it once, get it from the library or something, you're going to have a good enough time, because you'll be caught up, I think, as I was the first time through, in the curiosity of the whole thing and in the sort of human element, that it'll still be enjoyable. But once you finish it, there is nothing left. You will get nothing from a reread, because again, there is nothing that the author leaves to the imagination or to the reader to interpret. So, again, sort of a very, like, tentative recommendation, recommended for a specific type of person, and definitely I don't think anybody's going to get much out of revisiting this book. So, pros and cons. I've already mentioned a huge con, but in terms of pros, there are pros. The idea behind the book and the way that the book is written is very actually interesting and compelling, and the story that is actually here is, I think, a very interesting story and one that I enjoy quite a bit, and it is told in sort of short segments with easy to read prose that makes the redundancies not as noticeable or not as obnoxious, because outside of those redundancies, or rather absent of those redundancies, the pace is really good. It's really easy to read. But at the same time, it also means that the language, as I said, it's not complicated. It's not deep. It's not, I don't want to say flowery, because flowery implies a sort of purple prose type thing, but it's not language that's going to leave you with a lot to contemplate. But in terms of just keeping an easy pace, easy to read book, like I said, if you're on a train or something, it's such an easy book to read to where the redundancies almost, on a first read through, maybe won't bother you as much. And in terms of the prose, really, like I already said, the story is very interesting, but the themes are very interesting. And I think that a lot of the way that the book chooses to explore those themes could have been very interesting on their own, had the author then not felt the need to go in and, again, tell you exactly, like, this is meant to be like this, or this is meant to be like that. And I actually have some examples from the book that I wanted to share. So, for example, well, I guess this is kind of getting straight into the point, but or getting into spoilers, which I don't want to get into yet. But the point is that it's a very blunt book, but it's a very easy to read book. It's got very short sections, but a lot of those sections end up being redundant. It's got an interesting plot and concept, but it's be executed in kind of a clumsy way. So it's like almost for every pro there's a con, but for every con there's a pro, and you end up with something that's kind of just stuck in the middle. Like I said, thematically interesting, but doesn't trust the reader to really complicate the issue unto its depths. Interesting story, but again, just spelled out to the point of frustration. Interesting characters, but their depth and some of the character traits feel like they exist mostly to lend the character present rather than to necessarily be a central part of their theme or their development as a person. And I would just say, as a con, it feels kind of like certain things can end up wrapped up a little bit too cleanly or a little bit too quickly. But that, it sucks to end on a con, but I just kind of am going to, because I feel like in being so negative, I'm sort of bringing my experiences reading this a second time, which is not going to be most people's experience reading it the first time. So, again, just keep that in mind if you're thinking about reading this book, because after this I will go into spoilers. This is your last chance to bow before spoilers. If you, like I said, are interested in reading this book, I'd say just give it a try, but be aware of the bluntness and be aware that, like I said, you're just not going to get much out of it if you reread it again. So, getting into spoilers, into what I will think of less as themes and more analysis. Again, like, the theme of the book is very much questions of identity, not even questions, it's a sort of singular question of why would somebody want to switch the life that they have for somebody else's life. And this is sort of represented, obviously you have the titular man himself, Daisuke, who it turns out is actually Haru Hana. I already forgot. But he is the child of a serial murderer, not a serial murderer, of a somebody who did a very big, not even very big. He basically assaulted a family and killed a family of 3, which Hada is his name. He's the child that his father assaulted, and the child happened to be Hada's associate, and not quite friend, but close to friend. And in search of money to pay off gambling debts, his father breaks into this house, steals the money, kills the family, and burns it down, and is executed for it. And the prejudice against Hada haunts him his whole life. And so he takes the chance to switch identities and tries to start a new life. So obviously for him, there's this escaping the past and the identity that has so heavily weighed upon him. But with Kido, it uses his status as I believe it's Zainichi is the exact word. I could be wrong on that. I'm going to pause for a second and actually look that up. Yep, I was correct. Zainichi. The element of his being a Zainichi and at the same time being raised as a Japanese national and being naturalized is an element that is, I feel, really central to his character, and yet via the book's insistence on internal monologues and absence of actual action really hinders the development or exploration of that theme, because it is ultimately a conflict that we only ever see take place inside Kido's head or in his one before the book started supposed actions providing pro bono lawyer support for victims of the tsunami, specifically Koreans, which supposedly put a strain on his marriage that it has not quite recovered from. And this sort of dichotomy is brought up a lot throughout the book, but it's either brought up in his head or it's brought up by other people. He never acts on it. His being a Zainichi is a way that he relates to Daisuke or Hara, but it's never necessarily a driving motivation for what he does or why he acts. Even though the book somewhat tends to imply that he's having a bit of a midlife crisis, the midlife crisis, so far as I can tell, is just driven more by his failing marriage and him not really being certain of that, which he feels is kind of related to his Zainichi status, but at the same time, that's not really the problem. That's not really what's going on. And even he's kind of aware of it, which to a certain extent, it just really, really undercuts that entire aspect of his character. And that is the aspect of his character which most strongly ties him to Hara in terms of the prejudice that one receives for something that they ultimately had no control over. So in that sense, like, yes, Kido and Hara are both people looking to reinvent themselves due to sort of prejudice about who they are, and they have that relation. But in Kido's sense, it's very much a conflict that is entirely in his head and never manifests itself externally in any way or in much of his behavior, aside from, like I said, supposedly being the drive for this whole thing, but it doesn't come across that way to me very well. But then you have Rie, who also is somebody. It's not so much that she is looking to change who she is or anything like that. She very much has a family that she adores and whatnot. It's not, Rie's presence in the story to me isn't necessarily a question of another person seeking to change their identity, so much as it is another way of portraying the reaction to tragedy in terms of like her previous son died, her marriage failed, she was growing up, she was like the smartest in her town. She moved away from her town, and yet, due to circumstances, her son died. She divorced her husband. She moved back to town. Never really like, and this is kind of a small dying town. So her future looked so bright, and then she found a new husband, had a new daughter, life was going great, and then the husband died again. So certainly if there is somebody who has every right to sort of hate their past, not that Kido or Hara don't have perfectly valid justification, just if there's somebody who has been screwed over by destiny harder than Rie, it's difficult to think who that might be, and yet in the face of that, she continues to sort of fight on and struggle on. And that's, while it doesn't quite tie in as neatly to the thematic through line as Kido's relationship to Hara, it nonetheless also provides the question of what Hara's decision to change his identity meant to the people around him, because they are in a sense victims of this duplicity. But also, like I said, just Rie being somebody who went through such hard times is another sort of aspect of how to cope with it, how to deal with it, or rather how to remain strong in the face of it. Although thematically the story doesn't really provide a whole lot of how she manages it or how she pulls it off. And in fact, we don't really get much insight into her really beyond a few chapters in the book. It's really not that dedicated to her. So as for how is questionable, I guess thematically, it doesn't really explore how she does it. It just states that she sort of does. She's just the sort of keep on trucking on. I know everything is difficult, but I have to keep strong for my kids and things like that. Like, it's, you could call it a criticism. I'm increasingly in the moment as I talk about it thinking of it as a criticism, but whatever. So that is sort of, and this is sort of reinforced by early on in the story, Kido is asked by his son about the story of Narcissus and why did Narcissus transform. And at the end of the book, Kido gets a book on Greek mythology and reads the story of Narcissus and is reflecting about it. And again, like this idea of transformations, becoming somebody else, very obviously a connection to the themes of the book. One can make that sort of intuition, leap of intuition on their own. And yet this is what I mean in terms of the book just straight out spelling everything out. In the sort of first passage, or rather the sort of second passage, after reading the book, Kido's sort of thoughts, as it says, the myth stirred up various ruminations for Kido. The last of these, as he read the passage where Narcissus screams, "Oh, would that I could depart from my own body," upon realizing that the reflection is of himself, was that it related to Hara, for both Narcissus and Hara had wanted to depart from their bodies. If this had been possible for Narcissus, he would have been able to love himself, whereas Hara wanted to become someone else, to love another, and to be loved by that other. And yet ultimately, perhaps, by becoming a stranger, Hara too had sought a way to love himself from the very beginning, to love not just the proper noun Makoto Hara, but also the person that should have been. And it's like, okay, again, you're just taking what I could have connected in my head and just spelling it out. And it goes a step further in the next section by expanding the myth of Narcissus to other Greek myths, and again the concluding paragraph, allowing these myths to meander through his mind, arising as they came to him and passing away. Kido thought of not just Hara, but of the whole multitude who had exchanged their family registers through Omiura. Perhaps they too, like such mythical figures, whether in the throes of sorrow, driven by desperation, or pressured by others, had been forced to transform into a different being, some finding love and happiness, others tumbling further from grace. So again, you have this sort of very obvious connection in the story of Narcissus and just sort of the Greek mythology and the various transformations that could have been left sort of subtly for the reader to decide, but Keiichiro Hirano comes in and spells it out, which really makes trying to do any further analysis of this book feel like a waste of time, because anybody who bothers reading it is going to get what the book is going for. And aside from the extremely obvious of what I have just said, I mean, even, like I mentioned Kito's Zainichi not really being reflected in the action, but even Kito's sort of quote-unquote temptation with the other girl in the story, give me 1 second, I'm going to look up her name, Misuzu, it never comes across as a genuine kind of temptation. The idea that Kito is ever going to sleep with Misuzu or is going to genuinely ever leave his life for her, never even remotely plausible that he would do this, which means that her role as a temptress, her role to make him seriously question his current situation, his current life, is just patently absurd. It's fine insofar as, it exists in the story. I'm not saying that she necessarily has to be that way or that he has to have a genuine crisis of faith, but a character's resolution is only as strong as their convictions are put to the test. And Kito's conviction is ultimately never really put under a lot of strain, either as his Zainichi background, which, as I said, never comes up in the story in any kind of action, never really plays a serious role in his actions or his behavior, his choices, or his conflicts, nor does Misuzu and the possibility of an affair there ever challenge his convictions. Because again, from the start, the idea that he likes her, but the idea that he would ever actually have an affair with her is absurd. So you're just kind of left with a whole bunch of semi-character traits that make his ultimate realization at the end, or his ultimate rationalization, that he is going to ignore the fact that his wife is cheating on him in order to preserve his sort of happy idea of marriage, fall kind of flat. And it's definitely one of the weakest aspects of the book to me, even outside of the sort of blatant overspelling and whatnot. So that's, again, my analysis. It's not a great analysis, but again, it feels redundant to say a whole lot about the book, because anything I say about the book would mostly just be quoting the book back to you. So if you want to know more about the book, just read the damn book. And that's all for this week. Not this week. I don't even upload in weeks. This is One Cheek Books. I don't fucking keep to a schedule. Next time, I will be talking about Jose Saramago's All the Names. So see you then.